My name is Al Calfin, and let me go ahead and start our slide deck. Basically, our presentation today is going to be Is Your Head in the Cloud? There's a lot of material out there on the cloud that you and I will kind of briefly touch on today. It is more of an information session, really not getting into the depths of what's out there in terms of cloud and how data and databases and storages and all those things kind of work together and the expertise needed. My name is Al Calfin. I've put my contact info right there on the screen. Hopefully you guys are able to see my screenshot. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer for about 25 years now, MCSC since 90s. MCA is a new certification that Microsoft has. AWS certified solutions architect, CompTIA certified, IDLE, a few others out there. What we're going to do today is kind of go over basically what's out there on the cloud, kind of give you guys a brief intro on cloud services out there, and kind of see how the two biggest providers out there, namely AWS and Azure, what are some of the solutions that they're providing on there, and what are the opportunities on the cloud out there that you can look at as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start. Let's talk a little bit brief intro on what is cloud computing. Basically, at the end of the day, it's basically software and hardware that is operated by someone else, right, in other data centers. So you and I don't have to physically buy servers. So basically, it helps us enable users and businesses to have access to digital information from the internet, of course, rather than having physical servers in server rooms and setting up server data centers and racks. Just the capital expenditure of getting all of those resources up and running can be daunting at some time. So having that infrastructure out there provided to you by the providers kind of helps you start up. Especially it helps reduce IT overhead costs, especially for small businesses or startups, right? So it kind of helps us with that process so we don't have to do all of these procurements and physical servers and setting up data centers. And you and I probably are aware of data centers are not cheap to maintain, especially with the cost of circuits, electricity, and all that fun stuff, right? So again, it's basically hardware and software operated by someone else, and it's a subscription-based service. So market size, where's cloud computing market size? So 2021, cloud computing market size was about $368 billion. In 2022, it's right now estimated to be about $483 billion. Forecasted is about $1.6 trillion. So that's where you're looking at, and you'll find that a lot of industries are now looking at cloud solutions when it comes to providing resources for their customers and their employees, from banking to healthcare services, financial institutions. So you'll see a lot of them kind of looking at cloud solutions out there, okay? Now, there are some cloud models, and I'm sure some of us might have been aware of some of these models, but just wanted to quickly review the three important cloud models out there. The other two, co-location and hosting, I just kept it for historical purposes. But traditionally, when you start dealing with on-premise environments out there, right? When you start dealing with on-prem, you're not only responsible for your data, but all the application procurement, databases you have to maintain, of course, your data itself, right? And operating systems, virtualizations, print physical servers, network storages, and of course, your data center. Again, that involves all your additional cost of setting up your circuits and getting your physical racks and servers, right? So this is something that you are traditionally, if you were to set up an on-prem environment, this is where you were responsible for all of that. And so what has happened now is when you start looking at cloud platforms, they've kind of broken it down into kind of like three cloud models out there. So there's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So these are your three key platforms. Now, there are other services, cloud models out there, but these are the three main ones that I will go over. So infrastructure as a service is where the data application, databases, and operating system, if you need customization of your resources, you need to customize your physical servers, your networks, you are still responsible for that piece all the way up to the operating system side. And then from the virtualization side to the physical servers, network, and data centers, all of those are handled by your provider. So infrastructure as a service is where you're taking your physical infrastructure. So some organizations will still have servers out there, file servers out there, and they want to move them onto the cloud. So they don't want to be responsible for the physical servers. This is where infrastructure as a service kind of plays a role, gives you the flexibility of moving your infrastructure onto their platform, where you're not worried about physical servers, network, data centers, biggest one, right? But the virtualization software that needs to run all these services are all managed by the cloud provider. Platform as a service is where you are now going to take your platform, your application that you have written, your code, right? And you are going to be hosting it on a provider, right? So, you know, Rackspace is another good example, but, you know, all these other providers, AWS, Azure, they all provide you platform as a service functions where you can basically take your application and your data and store it on their resources, but they then take care of everything from database to the operating system. So you're not worried about updates on operating system security. And then everything after that, they're responsible for that. So basically it's your platform that you want to run on a cloud provider service. Now, platform as a service, you'll see later on, a lot of tools that you and I will look at will actually, even on Azure and AWS, those are the two ones we'll be mostly talking about. Those are going to be provided to us. But some of the tools that we are going to get from them is a platform as a service. They have developed the software, their application, and they're basically giving us that as a platform as a service. Then software as a service is where you are now subscribing to their applications like Office 365. So if you go and get Office 365 or Google Docs, right? That is basically software as a service. You're subscribing to software. And then basically they are responsible for their application, database, operating system, and everything from there on. So these are kind of like the three main cloud models out there. And again, each organization might find that, look, I need some of my servers out there, but I still need the functionality of managing my operating system. So they might need infrastructure as a service. And some organizations might say, look, I just want to run my code on it. And so they can also do that. And then of course, software is saying, I don't want to develop my code. I just want to have a subscription to some sort of a software that I can use, and I'll provide the data and run it. Like Power BI would be an example of that, right? So some of the cloud providers out there, the top three ones out there is Amazon Web Services, AWS, right, is also known as that. Microsoft Azure is another one. Google Cloud Platforms, IBM, Rackspace, all of these are all cloud providers, Oracle, right? But the top three are listed right there when it comes to that. AWS is number one, second biggest is Azure, and the third one is Google Cloud Platform. So these are your three cloud providers out there. So what is happening out there? If you start looking at our industry today, you know, we go through what we call industry versions, if you want to call it, right? So right now we're in what we call Industry 4.0. To kind of give you guys a little background, end of 18th century, we were Industry 1.0, mechanization, right? Industry 2.0 is electrification. And then you look at Industry 3.0 is automation, right? Looking at electronics, computer replacement, manual work, right? Industry 4.0 is cyber physical systems, right? Looking at, you know, different types of AIs, looking at data analytics, tools that can be helping us provide that. So where are we today? Today, we are in Industry 4.0 environments. So looking at Internet of Things, large data coming in. We're looking at servers that we need. We need AI to help us determine what to do with those kind of data, right? So right now, we are in that phase of Industry 4.0. And looking at a recent review of that Industry 4.0, you'll notice that the Industry 4.0 is kind of broken down into cybersecurity, cloud computing, like their mobile technologies, 3D printing. I'm just going over a few, not all of them, Internet of Things, big data analytics. So these are just some of the components of your 4.0 technology pillars out there. And if you see those percentage numbers, there was a recent survey that was done by a few of the CXOs out there, chief experience officers, and they were looking at where they are going to be heading in their platform in market space. And this is kind of like a number I'm giving you is basically what they said, that this is where they're heading into taking their companies and on the cloud, and what type of resources are they using for it. And you can see Internet of Things is basically huge amounts of data out there, collecting all that information and analyzing it. So, you know, Internet of Things, getting that repository set up, you got your big data analytics, looking at your data and trying to make sense of what to do. Keep in mind one very important thing. When you start looking at data coming in, don't forget there is infrastructure behind it. There's always infrastructure. When you have large amounts of data coming in from different types of resources, could be sensors, could be devices, could be, you know, data coming in from different websites, right? As to who's coming in, right? I mean, there were some numbers out there, some very large numbers when you start dealing with data. You know, we're looking at data per minute in transactions in millions, right? Even Amazon per minute, they have, you know, some 300 and some thousand new people coming in on their sites. So you could see the amount of data that's being collected. And so Internet of Things is basically providing us the repository for all that data, and then big data helps us analyze those. But at the end of the day, all of this is encompassed around cloud computing still, right? And then of course, when you have all this data, is there a way for us to do some sort of a AI or cognitive computing environment so we can have some intelligence built in? So that's where they see the percentage numbers that they see where things are heading towards in their organizations. So this is kind of like giving you an idea of within those industry 4.0, where are we heading in our technology? So give you guys an example, and I just picked one section of one of the providers here right now. And I wanted to show you the amount of resources that we have available to us by some of these providers. So I'm looking at AWS, and just looking at AWS data analytics services out there. Just imagine having to procure services, applications, having the data center capacity to manage all of this, and having the resources and of course the expertise at the same time to maintain all these resources. It would just be a huge amount of investment that an organization would have to make. But you can see now that with having AWS, for example, as a provider, that they do provide quite a few different data analytics tools out there. I mean, that's a pretty large stream of data resources that they're providing to us. So you can see that sheer amount of resources available. Now, remember, I am simply showing you a section of what they're providing. You know, this is just on the AWS analytics side. But you can imagine there's compute side, storage side, databases side. There's a whole bunch of resources where you can now get those resources from a provider without having to, like I said, procure, set up capital expenditure, maintain servers, right? And then of course, hire people to make sure that they can maintain those services for you. So in essence, what they are providing us with is some sort of a platform as a service. It's their platform, their application that's running on their services, their hardware, all right? So you can see that there's all of these different resources out there when it comes to your data analytics. So, you know, for example, looking at big data processing, Amazon EMR, data warehousing, where you're gonna store all your data. It's called Amazon Redshift, right? You've got your dashboard visualization tool, which is your quick insight. Real-time movement, that's a big thing out there, right? You're trying to get data. What are some of the resources out there that can be available for us to use for those kind of data analytics that we need? Storages of data, where are you going to store raw data at, right? So you can see all of these different types of resources. Now, this is just on Amazon AWS, okay? The next screen is all the data analytics tools that Azure provides. And you can see that here you've got your data factory right out there, basically integrating large scale data storage for you. You got your data lakes, again, analytics performances available from them. You've got your Power BI embedded tools in there that you can use. Synapses, again, a wonderful resource on Azure. that can actually not only they have like a studio enterprise solutions. They can not only allow you to manage the storage of your service, but also allows you to organize your data storage and kind of helps you make sense of it and then visualize it for you. So they have all of these different tools. Having to go and do that, buying different applications and third-party apps and hardware to support it can get costlier. And you can see how even on Azure, a lot of data analytic tools are available out there. So, and to kind of briefly touch on a few things, just wanted to kind of go into an AWS login that I have set up. And looking at AWS, I just wanted to kind of give you guys an idea of all the services out there. I just showed you one side of it. But if I click on services, and if I click on analytics, this is some of the tools I just showed you here. But when it comes to there, you can see that we have compute resources. Look at all the different types of resources, services available for compute, databases out there. At the end of the day, guys, when you start looking at data analytics, there has to be some sort of a database out there managing those resources. And so you can see database plays a very key role for data analytics. And so look at all the resources just available on Amazon, AWS. And then, of course, your Internet of Things resources. So you can see quite a few services are available for us to subscribe. And again, each organization will have different needs, and some of these organizations might have compliancy requirements. So some of those will be more geared towards, some of these resources here will be more geared towards certain types of industries as well. So keep that in mind. You got your machine learning, right? That's out there that you can also use. So again, here's a quick example. Amazon Poly Services is like their text to lifelike speech function that you can subscribe to. There's recognition, searches and analyzes images, and generates AI to kind of figure out where you are, where you are located. So they got, just some of these AI tools out there, machine learning tools out there that you can work with in there, right? So this is just looking at services and tools that are available on AWS side. On the flip side, I've got Azure. I'm logged into my Azure account. As you can see under Azure, if I start looking at my analytics tools, we went through some of the tools out there. So here's some of the data analytic tools, but look at the database tools. Some of them, by the way, I don't know if you, at this moment, I don't know if you've noticed it, but when you start looking at some of the database tools and analytic tools, you'll see some mirroring of tools out there. Like, for example, you'll notice that there is, and where it is, Azure Synapses Analytics, right? You can see that it's part of databases, but it's also part of your Azure Synapses Analytics is also part of your analytics tools. So there is a kind of like a mirroring of databases and analytics tools out there. But then you can see all the options available in machine learning, speech services, cognitive services, face APIs. Try imagine setting up those servers and getting that configuration going. Well, now you can just subscribe to those services and have a way for your data to be stored somewhere. So again, keep in mind, databases, storages play a huge role, right? So don't forget there's all these areas on storages that is out there. There it is, sorry. So you got all these different storage accounts that you can set up, locations where you want to store big data, right? So you can actually see that a lot of different resources are available for us just within our different providers. And I just picked two of them, guys. There's a lot more out there. I just picked AWS and Azure as our two biggest providers to kind of give you guys an idea of all the different services out there available for us to use. Now, opportunities on the cloud. So I've listed some technical opportunities, if you want to call it, but some of them are somewhat technical and non-technical too. But keep in mind, there are also non-technical opportunities out there. But looking at some of the opportunities on the cloud, you have cloud administrators, you got your security analyst, network engineers, automation engineers, huge nowadays to kind of figure out ways of taking repetition tasks and automating that. You got your cloud consultants, software engineers are your developers. You got, again, your cloud engineers, you got your network architects, people who are going to design the infrastructure for you. These are some of the average salaries out there for them. But don't forget, there are non-technical jobs out there on the cloud. project management, legal representations. I could list a few other options out there, but there's a whole bunch of also non-technical related opportunities that are out there on the cloud. This is just an example of some of the different things that are available for cloud services. So hopefully kind of give you guys a quick brief intro on some of the cloud services out there. At this moment, I wanted to kind of open up to Q&As, or if you want to, you could also reach out to the Microtrain staff, those who have invited you, or you can send a request to request@microtrain.net. But if I have any questions, I would be open to answer some of your questions if you have.
Yeah, Al, excuse me, some of the opportunities you mentioned, you noted that those were kind of technical opportunities, but you did say there were non-technical opportunities out there. I guess what I'm asking is if I'm not a technical individual, how does learning about the cloud help me in managing any data that I might use? How can that help me?
Good question. So one of the challenges, and I'm sure you will come across scenarios where you are managing projects. I'm going to use project as an example on this, right? And sometimes you're managing staff who have expertise in working on certain types of projects. Having the knowledge base of what's out there on the cloud will basically help you understand what it takes to implement, right? Some of the tools that or some of the new projects that you're implementing on your organization. So, we go through tech. I teach a lot of the technical classes, and one of the things we go through are people who come in who are non-technical, who are trying to understand what is it that cloud provides, but not only that, what are some of the options available? So when we are sitting down and managing projects, I have a knowledge base of what it does. You don't have to do a detailed day-to-day implementation of it, but having the understanding of what it takes to implement that project, right, would be one example of it. Samantha?
Yeah, thanks. So I have a quick question, Al. Let's assume, again, I'm one of those people that isn't super tech savvy and I'm never going to be a cloud administrator, right? But in my particular business, if I'm working right now, earlier in one of the slides, you mentioned the different cloud models, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. If I'm kind of just the marketing person here at my particular company, how do I find out what model my company is using right now? How do you just in my own work environment? How do I educate myself on what my company is doing and how we're being hosted?
It's one of those things that I think it's not something that you can intuitively figure out that it's out there. There will need to be some sort of an investigation, but at the end of the day, when you have your implementers out there, your team telling you that I got to go work on the operating system side and I got to go update the database or I got to go customize the application, then that in itself kind of gives you an idea that, hey, I've got some sort of an infrastructure as a service running because I have to manage the operating system. I got to update them. I'm responsible for that resource. So it's what we call shared responsibility model when you start dealing with cloud computing. And so you come across scenarios where you're responsible when you say infrastructure as a service, they're assuming you're taking care of the responsibility from the operating system side to the database, to the applications. And so then if you're looking at your projects and you're seeing that you're responsible for all of those things, that kind of gives you an idea that it looks like I'm managing an infrastructure. But if they turn around and say, look, we got to just update our code and everything else is taken care of us, that's a platform as a service. Right? So that kind of gives you an example.
Thank you.
Chris?
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the education or training that's involved just to get started in the field of cloud computing or cloud analyst.
Okay. So in terms of the education, of course, one of the biggest things, depending on which route you plan to go, the foundation classes are, for example, a very good example of us getting you started. at least understanding all the solutions. Like today, I just gave you 30 minutes or less intro, right? And you saw all these different services and tools that were presented. It's overwhelming, right? And so having that fundamentals class, or I think Azure fundamentals or AWS cloud practitioner, I'm just using those two as an example, kind of gets you started with what services are out there, not necessarily how to use them, but what are those services. So it kind of gives you a broad picture of what's out there. But then if you start getting into cloud computing, then you start looking at some of the additional certifications out there, like Azure Administrator MCA certifications, or you start looking at AWS Solutions Architect certification, SysOps. You start then getting into the day-to-day nitty-gritties of, okay, how do I use this, right? So the first one kind of gets you started, kind of gives you a broad view, like I would call it a 50,000 view of what's out there. And then the next class would kind of get you to the 20,000 view, okay? Now, why my feet views are so high is because there's a lot of services out there and a lot of different ways of implementing solutions out there. And so the third piece that I usually tell people is to, in terms of their learning abilities, if you're going to get into the implementation side of things, is to then play with the providers, whoever it is that you're using. So for example, AWS and Azure, they provide you free tier accounts. You can go and set up a free tier account right now with AWS and Azure and start playing with those resources. And they give you like 1 year or 30 days. Like Azure has 30 days of unlimited $200. They give you credit, of course. But they say, look, you can go and use any of our resources, start setting it up. You want to do data analytics, upload some files in it, they'll let you play with all those services out there. As long as you don't exceed $200, it's free. As soon as you exceed that, they'll start charging your credit card. But they will initially ask you for a credit card just to kind of make sure that it's a live person that they're dealing with. AWS, on the other hand, gives you a year, but they limit you as to what resources you can use. As a matter of fact, Azure also gives you a year, and then in the year part, they also limit you, but Azure has that one extra notch up, but they give you $200 and say, look, you can use up to $200 30 days, and you can play with whatever you need. All right. All right. So in terms of any additional questions on certifications, classes to take, please reach out to the Microtrain staff member who has invited you to the event today, as well as the request at microtrain.net. I hope this was a brief intro, a little bit informative as to what's out there and opportunities that are out there and where we're heading in terms of clouds. All right.